Welcome. This is the Train Signal course Windows PowerShell 3 Essentials. You're watching the lesson called Requirements and Installation. I'm your instructor, Jeff Hicks. In this lesson, I want to walk through some of the requirements that you need in order to run PowerShell version 3. Now, hopefully, you'll be running an operating system that already has it, but maybe not. So let's go through and take a look at this. Now, the easy way to get your hands on PowerShell version 3 is to install Windows 8. With Windows 8 or with Windows Server 2012, PowerShell version 3 is installed right out of the box and it's ready to go. Really not too much you need to do. With Windows Server 2012, a lot of those features are enabled because PowerShell is used extensively to remotely manage Server 2012 instances. Now, if you want to use the PowerShell ISE, the graphical PowerShell, that should get installed by default on Windows 8. On Windows Server 2012, you don't really need it, but if you did want it, it is an optional feature that you can install. As an optional feature, you may also need .NET Framework 3.5. There may be a few other little things you might need. So that's the easy way to get your hands on PowerShell version 3. Otherwise, it is supported on what we're now calling legacy operating systems. So you can get 32 or 64-bit versions of PowerShell version 3, which is actually bundled as part of the Windows Management Framework, which includes a bunch of other bits that are needed as well in order to get all the PowerShell 3 to work. So you can go and get 32 and 64-bit versions that will run on Windows 7 with Service Pack 1. It will run a Windows Server 2008 R2, also requires Service Pack 1. Or it will run a Windows Server 2008 with Service Pack 2. You can still run PowerShell version 2 on XP Vista and Server 2003, but you will never be able to run PowerShell version 3. And PowerShell version, well, whatever, has never been available for Windows 2000. So you've always needed at least XP in order to run some version of PowerShell. Hopefully, over time, you'll start introducing more of the at least Server 2008 and Windows 7 into your environment so you can start using PowerShell version 3. You can certainly use version 3 to manage those boxes running PowerShell version 2, but the more that you can get version 3 everywhere, the more you'll be able to take advantage of all of PowerShell 3's bells and whistles. So if you want to install PowerShell version 3 on some of those legacy systems, be aware that this does require the .NET Framework version 4. It includes the Windows Management Framework. Now, you don't necessarily have to install that separately. When you go to download from Microsoft the Windows Management Framework 3 bundle, that actually includes PowerShell version 3. But technically, PowerShell and the Windows Management Framework are separate entities, but they're all kind of bundled together, and we refer to them as the Windows Management Framework. This framework includes things like the updated version of bits, the new version of WinRM, which is used for remoting and for the SIM commandlets. SIM is the enhanced WMI approach that we'll have, and we'll cover this later in the course. And we also will get a server manager SIM provider, so when you're running PowerShell version 3 on servers, you're able to manage them a little bit easier. And that management framework, again, as I mentioned, includes PowerShell version 3. The best thing I can tell you is go to the download page on the Microsoft site. There's a short link there on the slide, and double check the requirements for the operating system and version that you are installing. Because I could show you something now, but something may change. So the best thing to do is go to Microsoft when you go to download it and double check the requirements. Although I can tell you right now, do stop immediately if you are thinking of installing the management framework, which includes PowerShell 3, on systems such as Exchange. If you're running Exchange 2007 or Exchange 2010, at least as of the time that I'm creating this course, PowerShell version 3 is not compatible. If you install Windows Management Framework 3 with PowerShell 3 on an Exchange box, you will most likely break things. Same thing if you're running System Center 2012 Config Manager, SharePoint 2010, or Small Business Server. Eventually, these products will be upgraded to support PowerShell version 3, But as we look at this now, don't install PowerShell version 3 on those systems. If you are in doubt, you should be testing the installation of PowerShell 3 in a non-production setting. So certainly, if you have an Exchange box, you would want to test that in a non-production environment. Say, oh, well, this totally screwed up Exchange. I don't want to do this in production. But again, if you go back to the download page, it will explain what things you should not install on. Here are some of them. The installation itself is pretty straightforward. If by chance you happen to have any PowerShell 3 betas or CTPs, that's Community Technology Preview, if you have any older non-RTM versions of PowerShell 3, you should remove those. You do not need to remove PowerShell version 2. That can stay. The install will clean things up for you, and you'll be able to run PowerShell version 2 side by side with version 3. If by chance, depending on the platform, and again, the best thing when you read the Microsoft download page, if you have any prerequisites that you have to install, go ahead and install those. You'll then download and install the Windows Management Framework package for your particular platform, again, 32-bit or 64-bit. Eventually, Microsoft will push this out via Windows Update, and so if you are running a Windows Software Update server, you could push PowerShell version 3 out to your clients and servers. So that may be available by the time you're watching this, it may not, but be aware that that is also another way that you may be able to push out and deploy PowerShell version 3. Now you do have some options, as I've mentioned. The PowerShell ISE, if you want the graphical PowerShell, that is an option you can turn on. The PowerShell version 2 engine, this is also actually technically an option. This does require the .NET Framework 3.5, so you may need to go into the server settings or optional features on the client in order to enable that. You can install PowerShell and the PowerShell ISE through the Server Manager if you're running this on a server OS, or go through Control Panel Programs, Add Remove Features, the Windows features, and you should see options to install the ISE or the ISE version 2 and the .NET Framework as you need it. You may have heard about PowerShell Web Access, which is a way of providing remoting capabilities to servers via PowerShell remoting using a web browser. That's a completely separate product and setup, and we won't be covering that in this course. But it is certainly, once you understand PowerShell remoting, that may be something you might want to look into, but we're not going to be covering it. Once you get PowerShell up and running, you may want to configure your console, the blue screen, which is what we're going to be working with. You may want to adjust the width. The default width is 120 characters. Most monitors now are big. We run intense resolution, so there's a lot of information you get, so the default is 120. You can certainly adjust that. You might want to configure things such as the screen buffer and the window size, configure the screen colors, the font, configure the history buffer, so when you press F7, how many commands will that remember. And I also always check to verify that quick edit mode is turned on. That's what allows you to easily copy and paste. So, you know what? Instead of me showing you a screenshot there, let me jump into PowerShell, walk through configuring the console so you can see some of these settings in action. Okay, so we're back in PowerShell, and let me just quickly show you the configuration of the console. I find the best thing to do is just open up your PowerShell session. Now I've got an icon here which I've already started. And in fact, let me show you here. I'm going to go ahead and close this. You can come here and I'm going to run as administrator, so I'm running in an elevated session. So you come here, right click, go to properties. So this is what you saw in the screenshot in the slide deck. Here's the quick edit mode. You want to make sure that that is turned on. It should be. That is what allows you to do simple copy and paste. The buffer size, this controls the number of commands that you can get by using F7. The default is 50. I usually set mine to something like 500. You can come here to font. You can control whether you want to use Consolis or Lucida Console, raster font, change the font size. Yours probably, if you are opening a brand new system, probably is different than mine. I've already adjusted this a little bit for my screen resolution and for my eyesight, to be honest with you. So I've got this set at 16, but you can adjust as you need. You can see the little preview down there. You can change the layout. Now, I have changed my width to 100, and I've also adjusted the height to 43. I've adjusted mine so it fits my screen nicely for my demonstrations. You can certainly adjust them however you need to. I do recommend, though, if you change the screen buffer width and the window side width, if you keep them the same, then you won't get a scroll bar going across the bottom here, which can sometimes be kind of annoying. This height screen buffer, that is this elevator bar. By default, this is a really small number. I honestly don't know what it is because I always jump in immediately and set it to something like 3000, so that when I'm running a command that's going to display a lot of information, it's just going to keep scrolling off the screen, but it'll be buffered. If that number is too low and I have a lot of information scrolling, then I'm not going to see that information. It's going to scroll off and I'm going to lose it. So I pretty much always set that to a really high value. And if you want, you can come here to colors and you can change things such as the screen background. So say you don't like the default blue, you could change it to a gray, although you need to make sure you change the text to something. So you can change that, apply it, and then that will then apply to all of the future times you open up this icon. Now I'm going to click cancel because I don't want to change anything here. But you can go through, modify the console the way that you want it to be. Now that quick edit, by the way, let me show you what that is all about. Because that's turned on, if I run a command like get process, then I can copy, I can select something just using the mouse, hit enter, that copies it. Then I can go to whatever command I want and use Control V to paste it. This also works the other way. If for some reason you're in another program and you have a command or something that you want to paste in, I can select it, do Control C. Now in PowerShell, you can't do Control V. You have to right click in order to paste that in. If you just do Control V, like I just did there, you get the little Control V, and that doesn't help you. A bit of an annoyance, but you just get in the habit of using the right click and that paste it in, and then you can run it. But that's what you get by using or making sure that that little quick edit mode is turned on. All right, so there's a quick little look at configuring your console, get it the way that you want it to be, because you can spend a lot of time in it. All right, that's that. Let's go back to the slides and wrap up this lesson. All right, so let's kind of wrap up the lesson here. So you've gone through, you've downloaded and installed PowerShell version 3, the Windows Management Framework 3. Well, what's in it for you? Well, what you're going to get is PowerShell version 2 running side by side. Now, there is only one version, though, of the PowerShell IOC. So even though you may have a PowerShell version 2 session running and a PowerShell version 3 session running, the IOC, it's still going to be the version 3, the newest version, which is good because the IOC has been greatly improved, and I think you'll really like it when we get that in a separate lesson. You'll also have 32-bit and 64-bit versions of PowerShell installed, depending on your operating system. There may be some tools or products that you install that only run in 32-bit, in which case you'll have to open up the appropriate 32-bit version. Most of the time, if you're running a 64-bit OS, you can just use a 64-bit console, and that should cover 80 to 90% of your work. I've only found the 32-bit consoles to be more of an exception rather than the rule when working on a 64-bit system. You'll have an improved interactive console experience. We'll have things like tab completion for parameters and commandlet names. It's going to be a much better experience because you're going to be spending a lot of time at the keyboard potentially typing. So the PowerShell version 3 gives you some great new things. We'll be looking at those. At least 1,600 new commands or more, depending on your products and other things that you may have installed. So the commandlet coverage in version 3 is exponentially greater than it was in version 2. There's more and more things, and new things are added every day from Microsoft and from other third parties for things that you can do with PowerShell. Really, managing your environment is now literally at your fingertips. Once you discover the commands and how to put them together, there's really no limit to what you can accomplish other than whatever you can think of. So there's a look at the requirements and installation of getting started with PowerShell version 3. As always, I appreciate your time, and I'll catch you in the next lesson.